Hi gang, the Arks of Omen campaign was one of the major events of the Warhammer 40k universe, detailing the alliance of Abaddon the Despoiler and Vashtorr the Archifane as they attempted to bring into existence a great weapon lost since the time of the Old Ones. It was released in 2023 as a series of 6 campaign books, and at the time I made a video about each one as they came out. Well, this is the omnibus version. Want to watch all 6 and find out what happened without scrolling through a playlist? Well, prepare your incantations to the dark gods and keep watching. Hi gang, so the Arks of Omen have descended on the galaxy in Warhammer 40k's latest campaign, and the forces of the galaxy are fighting brutal close-quarter boarding actions to stop them. But what are the Arks of Omen? Who is Vashtorr the Archifane? And what is the Silver Key? So, the nice people at Games Workshop sent me this, Abaddon, book 1 of the Arks of Omen quadrilogy. 3 more of these will be released over the coming months, each of which advance the plot and presumably add new game material, but we're not here to talk about that. Instead, in this video, I'm going to go through the first part of the story of the Arks of Omen. So, let's set the scene. The setting is early in the 42nd millennium, as far as anyone can tell anymore. At the dawn of the new millennium, Cadia fell and the Great Rift spread across the galaxy, dividing the Imperium in two. In its wake, the resurrected Primarch Robert Guilliman launched the Indomitus Crusade to shore up Imperium Sanctus on the near side of the Rift, the first phase of which concluded with the Plague Wars against Mortarion's Death Guard. Other major conflicts were fought at Chalnath and Octarius before various forces converged on Vigilus, a world that controlled the only route through the Great Rift. Both the Imperium and the forces of Chaos, led by Abaddon the Despoiler, poured forces into the battle for Vigilus, which eventually spread into a war fought across the Nachmund Gauntlet, the stable warp route between Vigilus on the Nihilist side of the Rift and Sangua Terra on the Sanctus side. And it's here our story starts. As Abaddon assigned more and more forces to the assault on Vigilus, commanded by his proxy, Harken Worldclaimer, the different warbands spread out to sow chaos in the systems and planets nearby. One of these targets was Pergamatros, the site of an ancient inquisitorial data vault. It was invisible behind layers of Auspex baffles, but over a short period of time, a series of seemingly coincidental events occurred. A system badly maintained, a failsafe that chose just the right time to fail, a backup generator that took slightly too long to restart, and the moon that housed the data vault was temporarily exposed to a Black Legion war fleet led by Warpsmith Vask, who just happened to be in the area and just happened to be pointing their augurs in the right direction at the right time. The battle for Pergamatros was swift and effective, and as the Warsmith's legionnaires fought back the Skitarii defenders, his dark tech magi scoured the data vaults below, where one of them, a lowly menial assigned to the Warsmith's forces temporarily, came across a Baroque data tome. The device looked to be full of dark and valuable secrets, so the menial, a magi called Jureg, resolved to learn them so he could advance his own station once he returned to his day job. As one of thousands of tech magi aboard the Vengeful Spirit, Abaddon the Despoiler's battleship and former flagship of Horus himself. Cut to some time later. The battles in the Nachmund Gauntlet continue to rage on. Mortarion is fighting his plague wars across Imperium Sanctus, but the Vengeful Spirit, badly damaged after the Vigilus campaign, is away from the battlefront, undergoing repairs. Abaddon orchestrates his long war from afar, receiving updates on his various commanders and allies when the whole ship starts to convulse. His warp oracles malfunction and strange silvery worms start to spread from every surface of his chamber, and he soon receives reports that it's happening all over the ship. Silver worms and brass clockwork cogs spilling from every surface. When his retinue and sorcerers eventually track down the source of this, they discover our hapless dark magi, Jureg, in the aftermath of a repair ritual gone wrong. And on a lectern at the heart of this ritual, the mysterious data tome. Dureg was taken off for excruciation, and Abaddon and his retinue followed the effects of the ritual to the bridge, where they found its systems ripping themselves apart and reforming into a great mechanical summoning vortex. And as the vortex sucked in the bridge crew and the servitors, and their blood anointed the ritual, a figure stepped forth: Vashtorr the Archiphane. Vashtorr is neither a demon prince, a demon, or a great chaos power. Described as a demigod, Vashtorr is the ruler of the Soul Forges and the chaotic embodiment of innovation and technology gone awry. The Soul Forges are an independent entity within the Warp, refashioning the demons who signed Vashtorr's contracts into great techno-demonic war engines like the Soul Grinders. And because of this, Vashtorr is unaligned to any of the four Chaos powers. He plays them off against each other, the arms dealer of the great game. But Vashtorr wants more. He wants to be a fifth great power, and he has plans to make this happen. All this he explains to Abaddon, including how he's manipulated events so far to affect his own summoning. Poor Dureg, he was a dupe all along. Abaddon has been searching for an ancient prophecy or fragment of knowledge that will lead him to a great weapon of fate-changing power, and Vashtorr points out that he knows what this prophecy is. We see the whole prophecy of a silver key inlaid with bone and brass beneath a world of ashes, a key that opens a lock blazing with the light of dying stars and can release a great horror from its long imprisonment. But Abaddon isn't completely convinced, so Vashtorr offers to show him and bids him meet on the world of Magdalor, where he can recover his first free sample of the key, because Vashtorr is apparently the demon of MLMs now. The world of Magdalor was defended by the Iron Angels chapter of Space Marines, and let's just say things don't go very well for them. But as Abaddon and his Terminator bodyguard carved through their fortress monastery, they noticed that much of the chapter had already been destroyed. Deep in the vaults of the fortress, they found the last remnants of the chapter making a desperate last stand against Vashtorr's techno-demonic hordes, and as Abaddon defeated the chapter master, Vashtorr presented to him the artifact they had apparently come to seek, a marble pillar floating in a stasis field. Vashtorr's plan was to create this key from the prophecy, and to do this he needed to gather and combine a huge number of esoteric artifacts. He didn't yet know exactly where they all were or how many he needed, but they all shared a common warp signature, so he'd figured out a way of tracking them. A few of these were in the warp, where his demonic legions could easily travel, but most were in real space, hoarded in vaults or buried deep within planets across the galaxy, in places harder for a demon army to access. But if they could gather these relics and create the key, Vashtorr could gain the power he wanted, and Abaddon could advance his long war against the Imperium. The Despoiler agreed, but he didn't want the Black Legion to do this on their own, especially with so many other conflicts happening at the same time, so he put out the call to all followers of Chaos, mortal and Astartes, of great gifts for any who followed him. Using the expertise of Vashtorr, he drew forth huge numbers of space hulks from the warp. Space hulks are the long-dead wrecks of spacecraft lost in the warp, millennia of human and Xenos ships pulled together by the tides of the warp and crushed into colossal mismatched labyrinths, haunted by demons and monstrous aliens. Even one space hulk is a cause for alarm if thrown out of the warp near an inhabited system, but through Vashtorr he managed to gather dozens, and as Abaddon's forces attempted to clear their interiors of dangerous occupants, at least just enough to control them, Vashtorr started his modifications. The machine spirits of the space hulks were bound with ritual wards, markings or great chains, and infested with flesh metal ganglions to tie their divergent systems together. Great shields, comms arrays, weapons batteries, and flight decks were attached to their hulls, and ancient weapon systems brought back to life. Each hulk was fitted with an obeliskine, a waypoint and warp beacon for their attendant fleets, and a captive portal that led back to Abaddon's staging area, and to control all this, a demonic pilot entity called a ferryman. These were the Arks of Omen, and Abaddon gifted command of each one to one of the warbands that pledged their service. Attended by numerous other ships, each of these Arks would form the center of a Baal fleet and be given a mission to follow one of the warp signatures and recover one of these mysterious fragments in whatever form it took, and to return it to him through the portal. After that, the warband in question could do whatever they wanted with the Ark. Once they'd returned their fragment, as far as Abaddon was concerned, they were expendable. Vashtorr and Abaddon knew that not every Ark would succeed, that some would be stolen and diverted, others destroyed, but hopefully enough would recover their fragment for Vashtorr to work his literal engineering magic, and to ensure this, Abaddon seeded double agents and Alpha Legion operatives amongst some of the less trusted of the warbands, and then set them off into the darkness. 12 Arks in the first wave. At first, the appearance of these Baal fleets seemed completely random, the Arks descending on populous hive worlds and deserted rocks, on ancient tomb worlds or planets overrun with swarms of Tyranids. The Ogre, led by the Nurgle warlord Gulthorg the Blighted, fought against the Adepta Sororitas and Black Templars along with hundreds of regiments of Astra Militarum in the Cortosa system. The Bloodmaw appeared in the skies of the Forge world of Graia. The Sobbing God materialized within a tendril of the High Fleet Kraken, and the Thousand Sons directed the Beast in Scarlet against the Necron tomb world of Vol. But eventually, the rest of the galaxy started to piece together that this was no uncoordinated random event. It was a new assault, a coordinated plan. As usual, the Eldari were the first to realize this, and as they attempted to predict the path of the Arks and intercept them, they reached out to Inquisitor Kotiaz of the Ordo Malleus. And alongside some other Inquisitors, the Imperium slowly begun to formulate some sort of ponderous response. Space Marine and Sororitas kill teams boarding the Arks in the depths of the void wherever they could be detected. Eventually, Abaddon's most trusted commanders were dispatched to key Baal fleets. When the Dirge Discordant was destroyed by a rival Chaos faction, Abaddon took command of its mission himself, destroying the Cadians stationed on Chiron Tertius and rescuing the innocuous stone chalice that lay at the end of the thread. And when the mission to rescue the fragment found on Malakbile faltered, Abaddon dispatched one of his greatest weapons, the demon Primarch Angron, champion of Khorne and lord of the World Eaters. And that's the story so far. Abaddon's on a giant galactic Easter egg hunt trying to collect all the Pokemon so Vashtorr can make them into Megazord. It's chaos versus literally everybody else, including sometimes themselves, at various random sites around the galaxy, and the defenders are only just waking up to what might be happening. The next book in the series is named Angron, so I expect we'll be zooming in on that Malakbile mission and seeing how the rest of the galaxy responds. Thanks for watching. Hi gang, the latest Warhammer 40k plotline continues as Angron, Demon Primarch of the World Eaters, is unleashed alongside the Arks of Omen, and the forces of Chaos turn their beady eyes on the Malakbile system. So, let's dive into the story. So the second Arks of Omen book is upon us, and as well as the new rules that someone else can make a video about, our story has progressed a bit. So, where did we leave off? In Arks of Omen Abaddon, we find the War Master of Chaos himself hiding out in the Warp, where he's propositioned by the Lord of the Soul Forges, the demigod of innovation run amok, Vashtorr the Archiphane. Vashtorr has a plan to gather up various esoteric and powerful artifacts from across the galaxy and forge them into a great key. A key that will unlock a vault that will unleash an even greater weapon, one that will raise him to the status of a major warp power and harm the Imperium in a way that converges with Abaddon's long war. Together they gather various Chaos warbands, gift them modified space hulks pulled from the depths of the warp, and send them out into the galaxy on a mission to recover these lost artifacts, and then, cause some chaos. And at the point we left them, the Eldar and the Imperium were just starting to realize what was happening. The Despoiler himself had deployed to Chiron Tertius, and Vashtorr had gone to get the faltering mission to Malakbile back on track. And it's that mission that's the subject of this second book. Because the mission to Malakbile was led by the World Eaters and their demon Primarch, Angron. But, as always, our story starts elsewhere. Inquisitor Glory Emagna, silliest Inquisitor name so far there, was a hardline Puritan of the Ordo Malleus. She was convinced that the Imperium had fundamentally misunderstood the Psykers that had become ever more common since the psychic awakening caused by the Great Rift. These Psykers weren't just heretics and witches, in fact, they weren't people at all. They were flesh and blood machines, gifted by the God Emperor for the use of humanity. And she had discovered a perfect use for them. On the world of Malakbile in the Malak system, her agents had uncovered a relic of the Dark Age of technology, an ancient psychic focusing device called the Choral Engine. Provided it had enough human fuel, the engine would act as a psychic beacon, a second mini Astronomicon to cut through the warp storms that plagued Imperium Sanctus. But she was having trouble convincing enough people of the sanity of this plan to really put it to the test. That was until she presented her findings to Fleetmaster Abcondis, commander of the Indomitus Crusade Fleet Quartus. Quartus was a second-line fleet, designated to secure and hold areas of the Imperium already reconquered by other fleets, but it had run into a string of delays and bad luck over the previous few years. Its battle groups were spread out thinly across the reconquered Imperium, plagued by setbacks and poor communications, by delays and ambushes by the archenemy, eventually reaching the point where astropathic communication was practically impossible, and even short warp jumps incredibly dangerous. So, though he too had misgivings about the sanity of her plan, Inquisitor Imagna's Choral engine seemed like it could be exactly what the fleet needed. They moved into action, Inquisitor Imagna's authority and Fleetmaster Abcondis' resources, securing and fortifying the site, bringing its ancient engines back to life, and constructing around it the Fortress of Light. They located the supplies of psychers needed to keep it functioning, and initially it proved a great success. The shining light of the Choral engine not only calmed the warp and aided in communication, but seemed to push back the Cicatrix Maledictum nearby. Soon, Fleet Quartus was starting to catch up on its targets, but the true threat of the engine wasn't revealed until months later, when a Grey Knight strike cruiser suddenly appeared in the Malak system, and Brother Captain Crom of the Fourth Brotherhood teleported directly aboard Abcondis' flagship, the Honor of Terror. The scrying mirrors of the Grey Knights had seen the Choral engine as a shining beacon of light, but one that had pierced right to the center of the warp and attracted the attention of more than just a Crusade fleet. They held judgment on whether the device was divine or heretical, but either way, they prophesied that the forces of chaos had already been drawn to it in huge numbers. The Fleetmaster should prepare for an all-out assault on the system. And unknown to the Imperial defenders, inbound were one of the largest Baal fleets of chaos. Centered around the Ark of Omen Clarion Dire were the forces of the World Eaters Legion, their fleet gathered in numbers unseen in millennia and nominally led by the demon primarch Angron. Of course, Angron had no intention of rescuing some artifact for the likes of Abaddon and Vashtorr. The gift of the Clarion Dire had been a means to an end, to bring war to the Malak system and end this shining beacon of psychic power. Angron's life was one of pain and hallucination, but as a demon prince of Khorne, the presence of this shining warp light pained him most of all and offended his patron who despised the psychic arts. Angron was there, aboard his ancient flagship Conqueror, with a Space Hulk and half the World Eaters Legion at his back to destroy the Choral engine and kill anything still standing on the planet of Malakbile. But they weren't the only ones interested in the Malak system. The Tonekeepers of the Scourged, a Tzeentch warband, watched all this happening from their Ark of Omen, the Stygian Heart. They'd already achieved their objective and sent back the artifact they acquired. Now they were interested in the Choral engine itself and the secrets it held. If they could arrive in-system before the Baal fleet of Khorne, they could claim the Choral engine while the forces of the World Eaters and the Imperium dueled in the skies above. And so it was that the Stygian Heart and its attendant fleet was the first to make translation into the Malak system, and what they found was a system swarming with Imperial craft. On the warning of the Brother Captain, Fleetmaster Abcondis had summoned almost the entire of Fleet Quartus to Malak, and the void sang with Auspex returns from Imperial craft. The various battle groups and task forces moved in for the attack, and the Stygian Heart was harried all the way through the system, its fleet spread out, reaping a toll in Imperial defenders, buying as much time as possible, but eventually the Imperial numbers began to tell, and the Chaos fleet was smashed aside. But as the defenders congratulated themselves on this easy victory and started to turn their guns on the Hulk itself, alarms sounded from their auger stations as the Baal fleet of the World Eaters translated in system, and suddenly it was the Imperials that were outnumbered. What followed was a bloody and brutal Void engagement. The Void Talons Space Marine chapter dueled with the fleet of the Demon Prince Drigor in the asteroid belt of Malacandrias. Admiral Aquilent Pell pulled his forces back from the Stygian Heart, but they were outgunned and sidestepped at Malacra as the Khorne fleet used the gravity of the planet to push them further in-system. Hibogan Khan of the White Scars led a series of raids to cripple incoming strike cruisers. The Imperial Fist's Codicea Dias seized the Bloodied Fang. Across the void, forces from a slew of chapters and forge worlds dueled with the oncoming fleet in a series of strikes, and boarding actions, Angron himself led the charge in the void, his flagship the Conqueror snaring the Resplendent with its Ursus claws, and Angron punching through it like a comet, tearing through the crew as the Imperial cruiser came apart. Despite stiff resistance, the Chaos Fleet continued its progress towards Malakbile, the only pause coming when Canoness Verity Cade led her battle sisters on a daring boarding assault into the Clarion Dire itself. All contact was lost with them soon after, before the Ark suddenly translated back into the warp, the near-space translation destroying several of its attendant craft. But despite the loss of the Ark, the Khornate forces continued. Near the poles of Malakbile, the Exsanguinator dueled with the forces of the Grey Knights, but near the equator, the Conqueror and its fleet started their assault. Hundreds of drop pods and landing craft disgorging thousands of traitors to the surface of the planet, all led by Angron. In response, the Fleet Master ordered the Honor of Terror and any nearby craft to break off from the Void engagement and commence their own assault on the planet. Imperial forces deployed to the surface, all while the Honor of Terror came under heavy attack, its defenders mobilizing to fortify its corridors and gun decks against a boarding assault led by Khan the Betrayer. On the planet, Inquisitor Imagna's Tempestus Scion army had deployed throughout the Fortress of Light as Imperial forces across the planet engaged the descending enemy. Regiments from Krieg, Space Marines of the Sons of Medusa and Imperial Fists, Sisters of the Order of Our Martyred Lady, and Knights from House Terran fought to defend the approaches to the fortress from hordes of berserk World Eater Astartes, frothing cultists, demons of the Immaterium, and hideous demon engines led by the Lord Invocatus. And at the forefront, unaware of where he really was, smashing aside regiments of guardsmen and space marines alike, surrounded by slaughter, was the Demon Primarch. He blasted aside the outer gates and led hordes of screaming demons into the fortress, 8 bloodthirsters manifesting in his wake. Imperial dropships screamed down from orbit in reinforcement, but none of it was enough to stop Angron. Inside the engine itself, though, and against the protests of the tech priest attending the ancient device, Inquisitor Imagna tried to take control of the situation. She directed her scions to disable any of the limiter protocols the engine used, to free the maximum power the machine was capable of. Surely the beacon was the light of the God Emperor, and so it would be his light that would cleanse the heretics at the doors. The wailing of the implanted psychers rose to a new pitch as shock waves of psychic energy blew out from the engine, across the surface of the planet. To the demons, it was a storm, those lesser abominations dissolving into the light, and Angron himself being forced back. But slowly, through the pain and the light, Angron pulled himself forward, towards the sanctum at the center of the machine, dragging himself along by his weapons and forming a wake for the 8 bloodthirsters to accompany him, as they slowly forced their way into the sanctum of the choral engine. The defenders were no match for the Greater Demons. The surviving Grey Knights dueled Angron as the Greater Demons tore their way through the Tempestus Scions guarding the controls. Inquisitor Gloria Magna decapitated by the swing of a Bloodthirster's axe, and Brother Captain Crom split in two by Spinegrinder, the axe of Angron. And, his objective reached at last, the Demon Primarch brought his weapon down on the central hub of the engine, finally knowing a brief moment of peace as his corporeal form was obliterated by the release of energy, and his demonic essence returned to the warp. The psychic explosion that followed was literally world-shattering. The initial shockwave blew away the demons, but the fracture of the planet itself caused untold destruction on loyalist and traitor alike. As Malakbile tore itself in two, the shockwave casting ships into the warp unprotected. But the worst was still to come. The victory of Khorne and the sacrificial offering of the doomed armies manifested in the murder curse. Across the whole sector, the rage of Khorne overcame loyalist and traitor alike, the accursed no longer recognizing friend from foe. Loyalist guardsmen, Astartes, naval officers and sisters alike fell to the weapons of their comrades as the fury of Khorne boiled across the galaxy. Only the Grey Knights, Custodes and Sisters of Silence seemed to be immune. Eventually, the entire of Fleet Quartus was condemned as traitorous, so difficult was it to weed out the few who remained loyal. And through this explosion of bloodletting moved the Stygian Heart. The final Ark was still in system, having attempted escape during the final battle, but seeing his chance to recover an artifact slip away, Vashtorr the Archaphane manifested on the Hulk, spiriting the cabal of Tzeentchian sorcerers in command off to his own realm and taking control of the vessel he created. He pushed it deep into the wreckage of the planet, seeking out a glowing spire of rock previously inaccessible at the heart of the world. And as the Hulk finally fell apart,
He pulled it through the Ark's captive warp portal. The bloodlust of Khorne had been sated, and Vashtorr had found the cornerstone of his new design. And that's it. A slight detour from the main story as the camera zooms in on the events surrounding just one, or maybe technically two, Arks of Omen. Thanks for watching.
Hi gang, welcome back to the Arks of Omen, the third book of the series. Vashtorr is out, so in this video I'll take you through the third part of the story. Right, first, if you're new to this, you might want to start at the start with the first book in the series, Abaddon, but in summary, this is kind of where we are. The Despoiler has teamed up with Vashtorr the Archivane, the demonic representation of technology gone wrong, and unleashed the Arks of Omen across the galaxy. Each Ark is a space hulk dragged from the rolling tides of the warp and modified by Vashtorr and then given to one of many Chaos warbands that serve the Warmaster. With its attendant Bale fleet, each Ark was then sent to recover various esoteric artifacts from across the galaxy, which Vashtorr plans to make into a great key to unleash an ancient power, something that will elevate him to true godhood, and further Abaddon's plans to destabilize the Imperium. So it's a ton of side quests while the Despoiler's busy with the main plot over in the Nachman Gauntlet. Last time round, we centered in on the demon Primarch Angron and the World Eaters as they assaulted and eventually destroyed the planet of Malakbile in an attempt to shut down the Choral Engine. A great psychic beacon shining in the warp, kind of like a really angry moth. But this time we follow the crazy adventures of Vashtorr, who manifested in the ruined system to claim a strange glowing stone from the heart of Malakbile. So, in his formless realm outside of time and space, Vashtorr is a little worried. He knows that the servants of the four great chaos powers might attempt to foil his plan, and he even worries that the mysterious Dreamer, the exile king who roams further afield by day and no longer fights alone, would try and stop him. Whoever that is. So he monitors the various Arks on their quests, trying to divine where he can manipulate the strands of time to result in a more agreeable output. Matters required acceleration, and by tweaking the clockwork probabilities in real space, the results of various machines over centuries of time, all instantaneous to him in the warp, he might construct an output that would be more agreeable. He manifested on a remote inquisitorial watch station, one that had been established to spy on and keep track of the secretive Dark Angels chapter of Marines. Inhabiting machines corrupted centuries before, and with the aid of Alpha Legion disguised as the Death Watch, Vashtorr slaughtered the occupants and released an ancient and feared abominable intelligence imprisoned within. And then he asked the rogue machine a simple question. Where might he find the Rock, the fortress monastery of the Dark Angels? In the meantime, far away on the planet of Marwan's Reach, the Ultramarines have been deployed to hunt down an elusive Chaos Space Marine warband. The planet was under attack by the Chaos Knight House Korvax, aided by a secretive cult of hooded Astartes who seem to be able to summon darkness at will and use it to transport the knights around the planet. Chief Librarian Tigurius, at the head of a task force detachment from Indomitus Fleet Primus and aided by elements of the Nova Marines and the loyal Night House Raven, have been engaged for months, attempting to pin down the Chaos forces. They had frustratingly little luck. Every time the Knights attacked, they'd bleed back into the shadows before the Ultramarine task force could bring its big guns to bear. But unknown to them, they were about to receive overwhelming reinforcements. Spooky heretic Astartes, clad in dark robes and ancient armor, who seem to be able to blend into the shadows at will. No, the Dark Angels haven't got a clue what you're talking about, but they'll take a look anyway. Suspecting the presence of the Fallen, those Dark Angels who turned from the chapter during the Horus Heresy, a strike cruiser from the Dark Angels had been quietly observing the deployment and, convinced, signaled for reinforcements. As Tigurius and his battle group fought on the surface, the Rock and its attendant fleet translated into real space at the edge of the system, barreling at full speed towards Marwan's Reach, carrying fully half the Dark Angels chapter. But as the fleet organized itself for imminent deployment, another warp rift opened perilously close to the Rock, and one of the largest and most dangerous of the Arks of Omen emerged. The Aurak Unleashed had been merged with with the abominable intelligence found by Vashtorr, and upgunned with unholy systems created by a wave of Dark Mechanicum cults seeded by Vashtorr over the centuries. Its Bale fleet, a force of Iron Warriors and Black Legion battleships gifted by the War Master, roared into engagement range ahead of the Hulk and unleashed their firepower on the Dark Angels fleet as the outer system erupted with dark energies. Samael, Master of the Raven Wing, had overall fleet command on the Loyalist side, and seeing that the Chaos fleet had the advantage, attempted to disengage, ordering full power to link up with the Indomitus fleet in orbit around the planet. But as the Dark Angels ships peeled away from the rock, the Aurak Unleash finally committed. Its reactors diverted all power to a vast superweapon at its heart, the one built in pieces by all those cults across the galaxy, mathematically aligned by Vashtorr so that their plans came together like clockwork at the exact moment they were required. A single blast of warp energy targeted the rock directly, blowing out the Gorgon's Aegis, the great network of energy shields that protected it, and as the stained glass windows of the rock's many towers shattered into the void, a vast swarm of attack craft departed the Space Hulk. Belial, Master of the Deathwing, had overall command of the defense as two fronts formed on the rock itself. The first was on the surface, where the armored might of the Dark Angels fought to keep hordes of Vashtor's demon engines from reaching the Tower of Angel, the remains of the Calabanite fortress monastery of Alderuk that formed the hub of the Dark Angels' defenses. But the most desperate battle was fought beneath the surface, where Grandmaster Azrael led veteran Dark Angels forces to try and staunch the invasion. The corridors and tunnels of the rock were filled with demons and heretic Astartes, as veteran initiates of the chapter, the only ones permitted this deep, attempted to halt their advance. Eventually, the fighting converged upon the Galleria Abscondael, as Vashtorr and the Black Legion Sorcerer Lord Zorfas attempted to gain entry to the Nameless Gate, beyond which lay the darkest of the Angels' secrets. Azrael countercharged with his bodyguard, eventually cutting down Zorfas and advancing on Vashtorr, but as the two dueled at the approach to the gate, a looping howl sounded and every lumen in the chamber blew out. In the darkness, swirling warp portals opened and the mysterious robed Space Marines emerged in force, attacking both sides. The Dark Angels initially ascribed this to their ancient nemesis, the Fallen, but close up it was clear the newcomers wore armor in the colors of the Word-Bearers or the Alpha Legion. But Vashtorr had felt the dark intelligence behind this darkness and already knew who was responsible, who had attempted to foil his carefully laid plan. Be'lakor, the Dark Master, first demon prince of the Chaos Gods, had laid this trap, seeking to scupper his plans, and Vashtorr suddenly found his mortal form teleported to the surface of the rock, where, as Be'lakor's allied knights of House Korvax rode into battle against the Dark Angels and the Demon Engines, the two demonic entities, threw shade at each other. Get it? Shade? Because Be'lakor. Anyway, they had a magic wizard demon fight. Be'lakor's manifested form was stronger, but Vashtorr could make use of all the technology surrounding him, leeching energy from the Dark Angel's void shields and redirecting orbital defense launchers to aid him. The advantage swung back and forth, but as the two Chaos forces fought, the Imperials pressed their advantage. In the darkness below, Azrael's forces rallied and purged the chambers of robed heretics and demons alike, while on the surface, the invasion of the rock bought enough time for Tigurius and his task force, suddenly without an enemy on the planet, to join in. The ships of the Indomitus Crusade hove into position above the surface, squads of Ultramarines and Nova Marines dropping into combat, and with the loyalist knights of House Raven avenging themselves upon their ancient enemies. With Vashtorr's plans now totally in ruin, Be'lakor and the dark-robed Astartes following him disappeared into a warp portal, while Vashtorr, enraged, translated back to the Aurak Unleashed to bludgeon his way out of the system. The Imperial forces were left in control. The process of purging the rock would begin soon after, but not before Tigurius and his forces were curtly thanked for their assistance and then ordered off the surface, Samael's fleet moving into assault range to enforce the threat. Far beneath the surface, the Dark Angels' interrogator chaplains started work on the few heretic Astartes they'd managed to take alive. His plans in tatters, Vashtorr raged at Abaddon. Be'lakor was meant to be sworn to the War Master's service. Why had he gone rogue and attempted to thwart Vashtorr's plans? The traitor forces were close now. They had 70% of the artifacts they sought, and 2 of the 3 core mechanisms. But for Vashtorr, an entity for whom time meant nothing and whose intricate machinations had multiple redundancies built in, new paths had opened up. The captives held by the Dark Angels in the Rock would have their minds unlocked, primed to give the Dark Angels the information that the Aurak Unleashed had escaped to the Somnium Stars. The Rock housed an artifact of great importance, and if Vashtorr couldn't take it by force, then he'd lead the Dark Angels to the key itself. And there we go. The Imperium actually wins something, and chaos yet again descends into chaos. But whatever the level of setback, it looks like chaos are finally getting somewhere. The Dark Angels are being led directly into the heart of Vashtorr's forges, bringing the final great artifact with them, whatever that is, and more than likely suspecting that it's an ambush, while the War Master and the rest of the Arks continue to prosecute their wars against the rest of the galaxy. The 4th book is called Farsight. That's out at the end of the month, so we'll continue the story then. Thanks for watching.
Hi gang, the 4th part of the Arks of Omen is upon us, and Farsight examines the effect the Arks themselves and the Chaos quest for artifacts has on the worlds of the Damocles Gulf. So, let's go through the story. So we're at book 4 in the Arks of Omen series. If you haven't watched them yet, I'd go back and start with Abaddon, the first book in the series. But to summarize, the War Master of Chaos and Vashtorr the Archivane are on the hunt for various esoteric artifacts, which they hope to combine into a great weapon. And to do this, Chaos warbands have been dispatched across the galaxy aboard great space hulks called Arks of Omen. Though they've suffered some setbacks, the Chaos forces have almost gathered everything they need, but some of the artifacts they seek are more important than others, and it turns out that one of the most important lies on the fringes of the burgeoning Tau Empire. The Farsight Enclaves are a splinter group of the Tau Empire, a breakaway faction considered by the Empire to be traitors and rebels, but who have kept their domains guarded and their people safe for generations at this point, all under the watchful command of Oshova, Commander Farsight, and his host of senior commanders known as the Eight. Farsight himself seeks to emulate his mentor, the great Commander Puretide, but the years and the endless battles haven't been kind to him. As Vashtorr's plan unfolded, the Enclaves were at war again, against their nemesis, the Orcs, led by the war boss Nazdreg Urdgrob. The Tau fleet had once again beaten back the Orcs to the planet of Werbork, where, led by Farsight and his Eight, the Tau forced the Orcs onto the back step. Though at some cost, the advanced AI battlesuit Oblotai was almost destroyed, and Farsight himself suffered from a torturous psychic assault from an Orc weirdboy, where he saw himself covered in blood and skulls and wielding a huge axe instead of his famed Dawnblade, visions he'd experienced before when he recovered the blade from an alien temple on the strange world of Arthas Moloch. On Werbork, in the wreckage, the Tau uncovered worrying plans. They'd pushed the main strength of the Orc forces away from the planet, but in the ruins they discovered crudely drawn Orc plans for something they called the Telefragger, a weapon of immense power whose construction had been moved to Nazdreg's fallback position of Dregork. Like a theme for the naming of these planets. Farsight had hoped to consolidate his forces after Werbork. They were tired and stretched, but the imminent construction presented a threat the Enclaves couldn't ignore, and so the fleet pushed on, extending far from their base of operations in an attempt to reach Dregork before the weapon was completed. The Tau fleet used the advantage of surprise as best they could as they assaulted the planet, breaking the chains that secured the vast Orc orbital shipyards and deploying pathfinders to sabotage generator stations. But they were soon drawn into a ground war in the huge mech workshops of Drek City where the Telefragger device was being constructed. Farsight and his loyal commanders fought Nazdreg himself aboard his teleporting battle fortress, the Git Crusher, eventually overloading its engines and escaping as the engines sucked the fortress, with Nazdreg still aboard, back into the warp. But as the Orcs fell into disarray and the Tau fleet prepared to push their advantage, another force broke warp at the edge of the system. The Farsight Enclave's battles against the Orcs have been observed by the Death Watch, the Imperial Astartes force tasked with the destruction of Xenos threats. But this particular Death Watch team held even more secrets, for it had been infiltrated by Alpha Legionnaires, this time allied to Vashtorr himself. They popped up in the last book. Posing as the Death Watch's advisors and their librarian, the Alpha Legion had stayed their hand until the Imperial Tarot was correct, and observed from afar. They'd manipulated Farsight, watching as he endured vision after vision, and making sure that events aligned to bring him to Dregork. For Nazdreg's capital shared a system with another planet, the dead world of Arthas Moloch, the place Farsight had discovered the Dawnblade and the hexagrammic devices that shielded his armor long ago, and where, at the site the town knew as the Great Star Dais, legions of warp entities they had termed Molochites had been released. The Alpha Legion continued to observe from the confines of this Death Watch vessel. They needed to force the commander back there to rediscover the artifact Vashtorr sought, and to do it, well, they needed a fleet. So, as the Tau forces pushed their advantage on Dregork, a fast Chaos Bale fleet appeared under the command of the Black Legion Demon Prince Ugalax the Soul Eater. I'm going to have to say that loads more times now. Directed by Vashtorr to the system aboard their ark, the Unhallowed, with orders to recover a key fragment. The fleet was colossal. The Hulk was accompanied by forces from the World Eaters and the Night Lords, and even Titan maniples from the Legio Volturum. The Tau commanders sat in council. They couldn't fight both the Orcs and the Chaos Fleet, but the presence of the Chaos Fleet meant they'd lose their initiative against the Orcs anyway. They also couldn't risk leading either back to the Enclaves. So Farsight resolved to play both off against each other, to lead both into a protracted ground war on the only uninhabited planet in the system, Arthas Moloch. The Tau arrived first, setting up hidden command centers in an area that encompassed the ancient Star Dais and preparing the ground for a guerrilla war. Farsight, aware of the danger they were in, even sent missives to the Tau Empire itself, offering his own surrender if they'd send reinforcements, before he sent the fleet into hiding at the edge of the system and prepared to fight for time. The war for Arthas Moloch was furious. Orc warbands fell everywhere in pursuit of the elusive Tau, rampaging across the surface. Chaos warbands deployed in all manner of dropships, hunting for the key fragment, and the Tau attempted to hide out between them, though as Ugalax got closer to the Star Dais, the noose wound tighter and tighter. Commander Brightsword was killed in action, Commander Bravestorm incapacitated, Farsight's 8 was reduced again to 5, and though the commander led offensives to try and consolidate and secure an exclusion zone around the Tau base, their numbers were being steadily reduced. Finally, a drone ship appeared in orbit with the response from the Tau Empire, but they refused any assistance. Insisting that Farsight's death in combat would be his only redemption, Farsight attempted to center himself as he took the next step in his increasingly desperate plan, draw the two enemies into battle around the Star Dais, and once again release the Molochites to destroy them both. His fleet was summoned back from their hiding places, ready to commit to a dangerous extraction mission, and the Tau led the Orcs and the Chaos forces into an ever smaller theatre of battle as they pulled them closer and closer to the Star Dais. But as Pathfinder forces fell back through the ruins, they discovered a strange anomaly. A wrecked craft, 10,000 years old, and bearing markings they recognized as belonging to the Imperial warriors known as the Dark Angels, but covered in a dark and pulsating crystalline mass. They reported it back to their commanders as a curio, but it was this report that the Alpha Legion in orbit had been waiting for. This was the key fragment the Chaos forces had been searching for, and as the battle on the surface reached its peak, they overpowered the remaining Loyalist Death Watch on the ship and deployed to the surface, removing the ancient artifact and its strange black crystals and departing on a direct route towards the warp portal leashed underneath the Unhallowed. Throughout this mission, the Chaos and Orc forces pushed further and further towards the Star Dais, where even the Tau were being spurred to fury by unknown forces. Farsight led the Tau directly onto the kilometers-wide Star Dais, his forces spilling Chaos and Orc blood on the surface till the ground itself opened up, and the Molochites, in fact demons of Khorne, escaped from their prison. Farsight was temporarily overcome, desiring nothing more than to stay in battle and spill the blood of his enemies, but he was reminded of his mentor and of his fellow students, Oshasera the Huntress and Case the Loner, and pulled himself back from the brink, his hexagrammic talisman glowing in its housing. Regaining control, he ordered the retreat as the remaining orc weird boys summoned a colossal wave of green energy that tore apart the demons and then turned on Ugalax's remaining warbands. The Tau escaped to orbit, but once the fires of war had died down and the orcs had chased the Chaos Fleet back into the void, they returned. On the surface, they found only ruins of the Star Dais, now destroyed forever, and a planet slowly returning to some semblance of life. And that's it, part 4. By all accounts, there's only one part left to go in the series before the Great Key is assembled and the power release. And of course, we have no idea what that is. Although there are a lot of Dark Angels around right now, aren't there? For now, I'll be eagerly awaiting the final part of the story. Thanks for watching. The Lion has returned, but can he stop Chaos from completing their dastardly plan? A plan that turns out to have started in a whole different book series, like years ago? Find out in this final episode of Arks of Omen. So it's the final installment of the Arks of Omen, Book 5 in this 4-part series, and in this we get, well, some sort of conclusion. It's fair to say that maybe this isn't what people are expecting to happen. Anyway, if you're new here, I'd recommend that you start way back with the first book up here, but if you don't want to do that, well, here's the summary. Abaddon the Despoiler, War Master of Chaos, and Vashtorr the Archifane, demonic lord of the Hell Forges, have been attempting to unlock a device of great power, sealed away during a primordial age. To do this, they converted a load of space hulks into Arks of Omen, and sent them out across the galaxy to search for ancient relics and artifacts, objects that could be used to build this key. As the Arks sent back their findings, they started to assemble their weapon in the Somnium stars, eventually discovering the whereabouts of the 3 key fragments. That's key-like important, but also to build a key. All but one of the key fragments was eventually recovered, but while the attack on the Dark Angel's fortress monastery of the Rock failed to capture the 3rd artifact, Vashtorr has succeeded in luring the Dark Angel's fleet to his staging area, ready to try again. So, the Dark Angels gathered. Their captives, imprinted by Vashtorr, had all been leaking information to their interrogator chaplains when, all at once, they started giving up the location of this great work, the Idolatros system. But the Angels weren't total idiots. They knew that while they had to stop whatever was going on, they were also walking into a trap. The great and the good of the chapter gathered on the Rock, the fragment of their ancient homeworld of Caliban that had survived its destruction, and now served as their fortress. Azrael, Ezekiel, Asmodai, Belial, Samael, as well as the summoned chapter masters of the Unforgiven, the successor chapters of the Dark Angels. In total, 3/4 of the combined strength of the Unforgiven chapters accompany the Dark Angels as they approach this system, and their combined Raven wings sped out into the dark. They might be walking into a trap, but they'd do this with as much forewarning as they could muster. The Ravenwing confirmed the Chaos forces. The Idolatros, Apostra, and Sacroleum systems were swimming with Chaos war fleets, but Idolatros itself was the most heavily defended, with great numbers of Dark Mechanicum warbarks present. Conclaves of librarians led by Ezekiel confirmed that Vashtorr was there, at the heart of the system, near some great device of arcane power. The Dark Angels split their forces. Surprise would be their greatest weapon. Their successors were directed at Apostra and Sacroleum, while the Rock and its fleet would simultaneously break warp in Idolatros and take the fight directly to the heretics. The resulting Battle of Idolatros was colossal. The Rock, swathed in its Gorgon's aegis and accompanied by a greatly reinforced Dark Angels fleet, broke into the system, heading directly for the strange energy readings near its core. The Baal fleet of the Ark of Omen Netherworld Blade responded. The Dark Angels outnumbered the Chaos forces, but the Chaos ships were augmented with strange and ancient esoteric weaponry developed by Vashtorr and the Dark Mechanicum. The Netherworld blade itself pushed into the Dark Angel's lines, but the Unforgiven had to press on. They feared that Vashtorr might escape. Daring fleet actions took out the Ark's colossal engines and destroyed its vital systems before the boarders were recalled and the fleet just pushed on. As they closed, they noticed strange symptoms, weird warp resonance, and a strange sense of dread that pervaded the fleet, though this unholy terror was worst on the rock itself. Nobody knew why until they saw what lay at the system's core. A planet, a fragmented world, chunks of rock held together by cogs and chains and hellish machinery, a piston-driven hellscape of industrialization, layered over the remains of burned forests. A planet reconstructed piece by piece and twisted into something new, and that planet was their ancient homeworld, Caliban. Okay, so this is going to take a bit of explaining, which handily Vashtorr does in this book, but to really get the full picture, we need to look into some other books. So here we go. Millions of years ago, before even the war in heaven, the greatest powers in the galaxy, beings that are like gods to any other species, created great engines. It's unclear if these are meant to be the Catan, the old ones, or whatever came before them. Anyway, when they were done reshaping the universe with these terrifying engines, they split them up. One was split into 3 parts and hidden as part of 3 different worlds, but these parts were sentient and longed to reunite. During the Horus Heresy, the Dark Angels Legion had come across 2 of these fragments. In the Perditus system, their Primarch, Lion L. Johnson, discovered the Tukulka device, a navigation device that allowed the Dark Angels to move more easily through the warp storms of the Heresy. The Tukulka was the bridge that held the other 2 together, but it turned out that they already knew one of these others. The Ouroboros was the dark spirit of their homeworld, Caliban itself, the strange presence that led to all the mutated monsters that haunted its forests, and it became instrumental in the tale of the Fallen, the Dark Angels that rebelled against the Imperium when Caliban started to be industrialized beyond recognition. And the third is something called the Plague Heart, which is like an evil planetoid that just showed up in a book. All this is recounted in the 2015 novel The Unforgiven, where the Tukulka device itself tricks Typhon of the Death Guard, Astalan and Cypher of the Fallen, and the Dark Angels into reuniting the 3 of them above the ruins of Caliban in a plot that would see the entire history of the galaxy change forever, but that plan failed and the 3 devices are split up again. But evidently Vashtorr read that book and was taking notes because it looks like he's trying again. He's not only got Caliban, he's remade it into a new demon planet he called Wormwood. And along with the Ouroboros and the Plague Heart, he'd also recovered all the other ritually significant artifacts that made Caliban what it was. The evil crystals from the downed Dark Talon on Arthas Moloch in Farsight, or the pillar recovered from the Iron Angel's Fortress Monastery back in the very first book. That was from Caliban. All he needed was the 3rd device, the one stored in the rock, the Tukulka. Anyway, seeing this from the bridge of the rock, Azrael was horrified and lost to rage, presumably because they just did this plot a few years ago. Recognizing the scale of sacrilege to their ancient homeworld, they sounded the advance and deployed onto the planet, hunting for Vashtorr, their fleet taking up supporting positions above the weird world. Led by Azrael, the Dark Angels deployed to the surface, but they were assaulted by hordes of demons and dark Skitarii, and as they battled their way through the pistons and cogs of the outer shell, to what seemed like the center of the weird emanations, they found not Vashtorr, but Angron, the demon prince of Khorne, summoned again. And as things went south on the planet, a hidden portal in the system's star opened and the real Chaos Fleet came out, led by the War Master and accompanied by Vashtorr's upgraded Ark, the Aurak Myriad. They fell upon the orbiting Unforgiven fleet, the Aurak Myriad burning directly for the rock, and as the monstrous ship finally came apart under the barrage of the Dark Angels, Vashtorr transferred himself through the tiniest of systems in the rock to the chamber that contained the Tukulka device and vanished with it into the warp. Things were going badly enough, but when the commander of the fleet, Grandmaster Nakir of the Consecrators, was alerted to another fleet coming in system, they feared the worst. But instead of more Chaos forces or another Ark, they received hails of greeting from none other than Dante of the Blood Angels, and he'd brought Dad.
Lion L. Johnson, lost Primarch of the Dark Angels Legion, had returned, said Dante. When last we saw him, he was asleep in a secret chamber of the rock, but now he was awake again. And this book just doesn't say why. Sorry, he's just there. Hunting in dream forests, his mind dislocated from old truths, a weird vision of a mysterious warrior that had appeared all over Imperium Nihilus, rampaging through Arks of Omen and leaving them deserted before being eventually discovered by Dante. The lion was accompanied by a bodyguard of kind of nice fallen. He renamed them the Risen. Obviously, all the fallen that had actually turned to chaos that he'd come across, he'd killed, but these were the good ones. And along with these redeemed warriors, he'd been fighting a long war against chaos, appearing and disappearing wherever he was needed with a spooky aura and a pleasing pine fresh scent. Now we know why these exist. The War Master's fleet pulled back, not wanting to be caught in the middle of the two Imperial fleets, as Dante and his Blood Angels led a drop assault. Reinforcing Azrael's Dark Angels on the planet, Dante fought Angron on the surface of Wormwood but was smashed aside, though before Angron could claim his skull for Khorne, green mists enveloped him and the lion appeared, ploughing into the Demon Primarch and drawing him away from Dante. Azrael moved in to support his wounded counterpart and signaled for extraction. The Dark Angels and Blood Angels fighting side by side through hordes of Nurgle demons and Skitarii to reach the extraction points, occasionally, if reluctantly, helped by the black-armoured Dark Angels of the Risen. Meanwhile, Angron and the Lion fought, plummeting through the strata of Wormwood, smashing through cogs and pistons, a bearded magical stranger and a great bat-winged demon plunging through the fires of industry until, eventually, they landed on softer ground. A fragment of ancient Caliban, its mists and forests surrounded them, and suddenly the lion held the upper hand. He was as a shadow, Angron too slow to catch him as the Primarch emerged from the mists, impaled him on his sword, and chopped off his brother's head with the edge of the Emperor's shield. And then he too made for the extraction zones. To stay would be destruction, as even he could not stop what the forces of chaos had put in motion, what exactly the heretics had awakened. In the center of the planet, Vashtorr finally recombined the three fragments of the ancient key, and ley lines of power burst across the surface as Wormwood, ancient Caliban, was transformed into the great engine it always was, one of the original devices used to build the webway, an eons-old tunneling device that could burrow through the spaces between real space and the warp, through time itself, allowing the forces of the War Master to, I'm not sure really. The last we see of it is burrowing into an alternate dimension followed by the Chaos Fleet, which means they could strike anywhere, but they could already do that, right? Because they're chaos and the warp wasn't ever really a problem. I don't know. It probably does other stuff too. It's probably really scary. Anyway, chaos win. Like they just win. They just combine the key. They get the thing. And the Imperium get the lion back. And that's it. That's the Arks of Omen. I assume to find out more about what old Sleepyhead has been up to, we'll need to wait for Mike Brooks' new novel to be out, but I'm pretty sure this massive tunneling death engine is going to be pretty important in the future. But for now, the story is over. Of course, there's more in this book. Boarding assault rules for the remaining factions, rules for the Lion and his pals, even rules for the Adeptus Arbites released in the recent Kill Team, which is really good, although they really need the ability to get in a police car to be used outside a Space Hulk. But as always, I'm sure someone else will end up talking about the rules. If you've enjoyed following this series, well, look, I've got a few of these on my channel, guides to the current and past happenings in the world of Warhammer 40k, in case you want to get up to speed in time for, say, a new edition to come out. And I'll continue to post more of these as and when I get the opportunity. Thanks for sticking with me through 5 of these books, and see you for the next one. And if you'd like to support the channel, well, like and subscribe and click follow. And also, we have a Patreon, which also has the obligatory Discord. Links for all of those are in the description. See ya.